There's no doubt that people think of themselves as witches and they practice witchcraft today.
There's black magic and white magic, as there's good and evil in everything. Black magic is more Satanism, devil worship, and bringing harm to people, whereas white magic is keeping a balance with the elements in the earth and doing what you can to help other people. In this episode of my documentary series, we will be looking at white magic.
The idea in the past is that all witchcraft was seen as bad, as this thing that would harm people, that would kill livestock or stop you impregnating your wife, or would stop you having kids. As long as there's been religion, there's been witchcraft. That's absolutely provable by ancient sources right through to the modern day. Magic kind of draws upon religious practices and changes them and turns them towards personal ends. Religion is generally about kind of a supplicant towards God, and witchcraft is more about the own practitioner's will.
Witchcraft was first recognised in Britain in the 1400s. The first real type of witch was a wise woman. A wise woman was someone who would help people around their village, family, friends, using herbal medicines, magic charms, and traditional law.
But the actual root word of witch is wicce or witche, which, depending on your translation, can mean just wise, it can mean the will, as in to will something to happen. It can mean sort of just knowledge, sort of occult knowledge.
Witchcraft was first made a capital offence in Britain in 1563. From the 1400s to the 1700s, it's estimated that about 200,000 witches were tortured and killed in just Western Europe.
The early church, the early sort of Celtic church, was a lot more sort of lenient on these sorts of things. They saw witchcraft as a bad thing, but they wouldn't persecute or prosecute you for it. They would just say you need to do penance if you do that sort of thing. If you put too much green herbs around your house in a certain time of year, that's kind of magical and you shouldn't really be doing that, so you should stop it. But it was more of a kind of, you can't get the benefits of the church if you do this stuff, so will you please just stop doing it. It's not persecution as such, but it's the beginnings of that sort of thing. It's interesting to say, going further back, people often think that it's the Christian church that persecutes witchcraft, but in pagan Rome, the first major witch craze started in sort of 200 BC, where about 2,000, I think, magical practitioners were executed. So it's been going on for a long, long time.
Witches were persecuted in many different ways. The most common way was drowning. If you were thought to be a witch, you were tested. If you drowned and died, you weren't a witch, but you still died. If you were a witch and you survived drowning, you were then hung or burnt at the stake.
You've got similar trials happening during the medieval period in Christian Europe. But in England, the main thing here is that witchcraft is seen as an exceptional crime. So it needs different types of evidence to prosecute it. And basically, because proof is very difficult to come by in these sorts of trials, if you've got 2 or more witnesses saying that this person is a witch, then that was generally enough. So, by the standards of today, it's bad, it's not justice, but at the time it was considered suitable. So, given that's the case, I think it's quite interesting that not more people were prosecuted in England.
A stereotypical type of witch from the 1400s has the appearance of crone-like and snaggle-toothed. They were normally someone who was quite poor and lived alone, although they would have their familiar, which is normally in the form of a cat.
How do you define what a witch is? Everyone's definition of witch is something different. I have a connection with the elements around me, and that's what I use to influence situations. Probably from the age of 5 or 6, I always knew there was something different. And as I got older and matured, spiritually as well as physically, that connection became stronger. A white witch would never put a hex on anyone. We only use our abilities for good. There's white witches and dark witches. White witches tend to only use their abilities for good. Black magic or dark witchcraft is a term used for the abuse of abilities, and sometimes sexual extremism, using their powers to control others more by fear than by any Satanism or actual ability.
There are a few films that portray witches in a stereotypical negative way, such as The Wizard of Oz has a good and evil witch. The evil witch is green, snaggle-toothed, has a pointy hat, a long nose, whereas the white witch in Wizard of Oz is all like fairy-like and pink and pretty, kind of like a princess. And that's just not what witchcraft or witches are like in real life. There's also the film The Witch, where a girl lives with her family in a small village, and then at the end of the film she dances around a fire naked with other witches, which is not what real witches do. A very common film, Hocus Pocus, also shows witches in a negative light, as they all stand around a cauldron making potions and bringing harm to people, which is not ethically how witches live their lives. They like to be good and do good things for people. Witches have and continue to be portrayed as evil, manipulating people that will put a hex on you. Witches have always been perceived negatively, whether this is because people don't really understand what they do and why they do it. They believe in balance with all things and live their life in harmony with the world around them. Most real witches tend to live alone or with their familiars, as they like quite private lives and they don't like to talk about their beliefs with other people. As a society, we may have moved on 600 years, but people still don't really accept witches for who they are. Maybe this is because they don't understand it, or maybe it's because they still fear witches, as that's how they've been portrayed throughout media for the last 100 years. You shouldn't believe everything that you see in films and the media. Blessed be.